Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had been falling since dusk. A steady whisper against the cracked windows of the small cafe on the corner of Maple Street. The neon sign outside flickered, washing the wet sidewalk in pulses of blue and red. Inside, Mark Davis, a 23-year-old law student, sat hunched over a half-empty cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His phone screen glowed with overdue notices, rent, tuition, and the last warning from the hospital treating his mother. He rubbed his tired eyes, the weight of another unpaid bill pressing down on his chest, when his phone buzzed again. The number was unfamiliar, but something in him said to pick it up. "Mark Davis speaking," he said, trying to sound composed. A woman's voice came through, measured, confident, with the kind of calm only power could buy. "Good evening, Mr. Davis. This is Eleanor Brooks. I believe we can help each other." He frowned, confused. "I am sorry. Who are you? How do you know my name?" "I know more than your name," she replied smoothly. "I know you are drowning in debt. I know your mother is ill. And I know you are too proud to ask for help." Mark's heart skipped. He looked around the empty cafe as if someone was watching him. "How do you—" "Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7 p.m., the voice interrupted. "And, Mr. Davis, do not be late." The call ended before he could respond. Rain lashed harder as he stepped outside, his thin jacket no match for the Texas cold. The cafe's reflection shimmered on the wet pavement, and for a moment, he wondered if he had just been pranked. But the name Eleanor Brooks echoed in his mind. He had heard it before, on the news, attached to charity galas and business awards. She was old money, powerful, untouchable. At exactly 7, he pushed open the glass doors of Brooks Bistro. The warmth and scent of roasted coffee filled the air. Every chair was upholstered in soft leather, every spoon polished to a mirror shine. At a corner table near the window sat a woman in an elegant gray suit. Her silver hair framed a face that had aged like marble, graceful but unreadable. "Mark," she said, gesturing to the seat opposite hers. "You came." He sat, still unsure if this was real. "Mrs. Brooks, what is this about?" She folded her hands neatly on the table, her tone even. "It is about an arrangement that could change your life. I will pay off all your debts, fund your studies, and take care of your mother's treatment." Mark blinked. "That is generous. But what do you want in return?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly. The candlelight flickered in her blue eyes. "Marry me." For a moment, he thought he had misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said. "Marry me. It is not about romance. It is a contract. I need a husband on paper, someone young, presentable, and discreet. You, Mr. Davis, fit the profile perfectly." He stared at her, disbelief freezing his words. "You cannot be serious." "I am always serious," she replied. "You will live in my estate, attend a few public events, and uphold appearances. In return, your debts disappear, and your mother gets the best care available." Mark laughed nervously. "This is insane." "So is losing everything you love," Eleanor said softly, her gaze unwavering. "Think of it as mutual salvation." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Mark looked down at his trembling hands. He wanted to say no, to walk away, to keep whatever pride he had left. But the thought of his mother lying in that hospital bed clawed at him. He finally whispered, "If I say yes, when?" Eleanor lifted her cup of tea, the faintest smile touching her lips. 7 days from now, Mr. Davis. I always keep my word." The rain outside turned to a downpour as Mark sat there in silence, realizing his life had just changed forever, though not in the way he imagined. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still smelled of thunder and wet asphalt. Mark Davis walked across campus with his hood pulled up, the same thoughts circling his mind again and again. Was that meeting even real? The name Eleanor Brooks felt too heavy, too powerful to belong in his world. But when he checked his bank account that afternoon, there it was. a mysterious transfer of $2,000 labeled advance payment. He froze in front of the ATM, staring at the numbers as if they might disappear. It was real. All of it. That evening, a sleek black car stopped in front of his worn-down apartment building. The driver stepped out, tall and silent, holding a cream envelope. Inside, a letter written in flawless cursive. Your mother's treatment at St. Jude's Oncology Center has been fully covered. Consider this a preview of the life I can offer you. E.B. Mark sat on the edge of his bed, the letter trembling in his hands. He felt both grateful and trapped. It was as if a golden cage had been built around him before he even agreed to step inside. 2 days later, he returned to Brooks' Bistro. This time Eleanor Brooks was already waiting, dressed in an ivory blouse and pearl earrings that shimmered softly under the light. The same calm authority filled the space around her. Have you made your decision? She asked without looking up from her tablet. Mark hesitated. I have. She raised her eyes, studying his face as if reading a contract written behind his expression. Then say it, Mr. Davis. I will do it, he said quietly. Eleanor closed her tablet and nodded once. Good. We have much to prepare. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were legal documents with embossed seals, schedules for fittings, and a list of upcoming events. Mark skimmed through, his pulse racing. There are conditions, she said, folding her hands neatly. You will not interfere in my business. You will attend 6 social events in the next month. You will maintain discretion. And, most importantly, you will not fall in love with me. Her tone was half amused, half serious. Mark tried to smile, but his throat felt tight. I do not think that will be a problem. Eleanor's lips curved slightly. People always think that in the beginning. The next week moved like a storm. Tailors came and went from his small apartment, measuring, pinning, adjusting. His old suitcases were replaced with custom luggage, embossed with the initials M.D.B., Mark Davis Brooks. Even before the wedding, his name had already changed. The ceremony itself was brief, held in a courthouse downtown. There were no flowers, no guests, just Eleanor's lawyer, a notary, and a photographer hired to make it look official. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Mark's hands were cold, and Eleanor's were steady. She slipped a simple gold band onto his finger. Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis. Outside, reporters snapped photos as they stepped into the waiting car. Eleanor did not flinch under the flashes. She moved with the same grace as if she had done this 100 times before. Mark, however, could feel his heartbeat echoing in his ears. The drive to her estate took an hour. The mansion appeared through the trees like something out of another century. White stone pillars, trimmed hedges, and iron gates taller than any building in his neighborhood. The car rolled to a stop before the grand staircase. A maid opened the door. Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks. Mark followed Eleanor through the massive front hall, marble floors glinting beneath crystal chandeliers. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of people who all seemed to be watching him. Your room is at the end of the east corridor, Eleanor said without turning. Dinner is at 7 sharp. The staff will help you settle in. Yes, ma'am, he said automatically, then caught himself. I mean, Eleanor. She glanced over her shoulder with a faint smile. You may call me Mrs. Brooks in public. It is easier that way. When she disappeared up the staircase, the silence of the mansion pressed in from every direction. Mark opened the door to his room, a space larger than his entire apartment. Everything gleamed. A 4-poster bed, antique furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a manicured garden, glowing under the late Sunday. He stood there for a long moment, suitcase still in his hand, wondering what he had truly signed up for. That night, dinner was served in a dining room big enough for 20 guests, though only 2 seats were occupied. Eleanor sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her posture perfect, her silver hair pinned back. The food was exquisite roasted lamb, asparagus, and red wine poured into crystal glasses. I trust you are settling in, she asked. It is different, Mark replied carefully. This place is huge. Feels like I might get lost. Eleanor cut a piece of lamb with delicate precision. You will get used to it. Everything in life is a matter of adaptation. Mark forced a small smile, but her words echoed deeper than she realized. Later, as he walked back to his room, he caught sight of a door slightly ajar. Inside, he saw rows of photographs, black and white portraits, newspaper clippings, and framed certificates. In the center, a single photo stood out, a much younger Eleanor standing beside a man and a small boy with dark hair. The boy looked no older than 5. And something about his face made Mark pause. He leaned closer. The eyes, the smile. It was like looking into a mirror from another time. A chill ran through him. He stepped back, heart thudding, as he heard footsteps behind him. Eleanor's calm voice floated from the hallway. "That room is private, Mr. Davis." He turned quickly. "I am sorry. I was just—" Her gaze softened slightly. "Curiosity can be dangerous in this house. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Mark nodded, retreating to his room. But as he closed the door and leaned against it, one thought refused to leave his mind. Who was that child in the photograph, and why did he look exactly like me? The following morning, sunlight spilled across the marble floors, catching the silver trim of the curtains. The mansion was eerily quiet, too perfect, as if every sound had been polished out of existence. Mark woke up in sheets that smelled faintly of lavender, surrounded by furniture worth more than his entire education. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw the gold band on his hand and remembered he was married to a 71-year-old millionaire. Breakfast was already set when he came downstairs. Eleanor sat at the far end of the table, reading the newspaper. She wore a pale blue silk robe, her posture as straight as the columns outside. "Good morning, Mr. Davis," she said without looking up. "Good morning, Mrs. Brooks," he replied, taking the seat opposite her. She folded the paper neatly and glanced at him. "The staff has prepared your wardrobe. You will need it for tonight's charity dinner. It will be our first public appearance as a married couple." Mark nodded. "What exactly should I do?" "Smile when appropriate. Speak only when addressed. And remember, image is everything." Her tone was calm, but there was steel beneath it. He nodded again, unsure if she was testing him or training him. By evening, the Brooks estate had transformed. Cars lined the driveway, their headlights cutting through the fog as guests arrived in gowns and tuxedos. Cameras flashed at the entrance. Mark stood beside Eleanor, trying to steady his breath. The tuxedo fit perfectly, but his confidence did not. When they entered the ballroom, every head turned. The orchestra paused just long enough for the whispers to start. Who is he? Why so young? How long will this one last? Eleanor did not flinch. She greeted every guest with effortless grace, her hand resting lightly on Mark's arm as if they had been together for decades. A photographer approached. "Mrs. Brooks, a photo for the press?" She smiled. "Of course." Mark forced a polite grin, the flash burning white spots in his vision. As the night went on, he drifted toward the buffet table, relieved for a moment of silence. That was when he overheard 2 men whispering nearby. "She married again?" one said. "At her age?" "3rd time," the other replied. "But this one he looks like someone. Can't put my finger on it." Their laughter was low, sharp, and cruel. Mark's grip tightened around his glass. He was about to turn away when the band began to play a slow waltz. Eleanor approached, her expression unreadable. "Dance with me," she said. He blinked. "Here? In front of everyone?" "Yes, that is the point." She placed her hand on his shoulder, and they began to move across the floor. The room fell silent again, all eyes on the mismatched couple gliding through the golden light. For a moment, Mark forgot the age gap, the contract, the whispers. She moved with elegance. Every step measured, every turn deliberate. Halfway through the song, her body suddenly stiffened. Her hand clutched his sleeve, and she stumbled. "Eleanor," he whispered. She tried to speak, but the color drained from her face. Mark caught her before she hit the floor. Panic rippled through the crowd. The orchestra stopped. Voices blurred together. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted. Mark held her tightly, feeling the fragile beat of her heart under his palm. Her eyes fluttered open just long enough for her to whisper, "Take me home." 30 minutes later, the mansion was quiet again. The doctor had come and gone, leaving a list of prescriptions and a warning about exhaustion. Mark stood in the hallway outside her room, staring at the closed door. The maid, a woman in her 50s named Clara, approached with a tray of tea. "She has these episodes sometimes," Clara said softly. "Too much stress, not enough rest." "Has this happened before?" Mark asked. Clara hesitated. "Not for many years. But tonight's music, it reminded her of something painful." "What do you mean?" Clara's eyes dropped to the floor. "That song. It was played at her son's funeral." Mark froze. "Her son?" "Yes, sir. He died young. No one speaks of it anymore." Clara handed him the tray and walked away, leaving him standing in the dim corridor, the melody from the ballroom still echoing faintly in his head. He knocked on Eleanor's door. "Come in," her voice answered, weak but clear. She was sitting by the window, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the rain starting again outside. Her face looked smaller somehow, stripped of the armor she wore in public. "I am sorry about tonight," Mark said. "It is not your fault," she replied. "But thank you for not letting me fall." He set the tea on the table. "The doctor said you need rest." She smiled faintly. "Doctors always say that. What they never understand is that rest does not come easily when the past refuses to sleep." Mark hesitated before asking, "Eleanor, the boy in that photograph in the hallway, was that your son?" Her eyes shifted to him, and for the first time, he saw something break behind them. "Yes," she said quietly. "His name was Matthew. He was taken from me 25 years ago. They said it was an accident, but no one ever found the body." Mark felt his chest tighten. "I am sorry. I did not mean to." She raised a hand. "No, it is all right. You deserve to know who you have married." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped gently against the glass, filling the silence between them. When he finally left her room, the house felt different, less like a mansion, and more like a mausoleum filled with unfinished stories. He walked back to his room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the gold band on his finger. He whispered to himself, "What have I walked into?" And outside, the thunder returned, rolling over the estate like a warning. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving a thin veil of fog over the Brooks estate. Mark woke to the distant hum of gardeners and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the hall. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eleanor collapsing in his arms, pale and fragile under the ballroom lights. He dressed quickly and walked down the grand staircase. Eleanor was already in the library, surrounded by paperwork and folders. The sunlight caught on her silver hair as she signed a document with her usual poise, as if last night had never happened. "Good morning, Mrs. Brooks," Mark said softly. She looked up, her eyes clear but tired. "Good morning, Mr. Davis. You look like you have seen a ghost." "I could say the same about you," he replied. Her lips curved slightly. "I have been through worse. Sit down. We have things to discuss." Mark sat across from her, still uneasy. "You should be resting." "I will rest when the board meeting is over," she said. "It is at 2:00. I need you to attend with me." He frowned. "A board meeting? You mean your company?" "Yes, Brooks Holdings. It is time for the shareholders to meet my husband." Mark almost laughed. "I do not think they will be thrilled to see me." "That is precisely why I want you there," she said. "They expect weakness. You will not give it to them." At 2:00 sharp, they entered the headquarters downtown. The lobby was all glass and steel, reflecting the skyline like a mirror. Eleanor walked ahead, every step commanding attention. Mark followed, trying to keep pace with her calm confidence. In the boardroom, a dozen executives sat waiting, their suits dark and expensive. As Eleanor took her seat at the head of the table, whispers rippled around the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady. "This is my husband, Mark Davis Brooks." The room fell silent. Mark felt every pair of eyes on him, curious, judging, disbelieving. One man cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Mrs. Brooks, this is highly unorthodox. You have always refused to remarry." Eleanor smiled. "And yet here we are." Another woman leaned forward. "May we ask what qualifications Mr. Brooks brings to the company?" Mark hesitated. But Eleanor spoke before he could. "Integrity," she said. "Something this board has been lacking." The remark landed like a stone. Mark could see tension ripple across the room. For the next hour, Eleanor discussed quarterly reports and expansion projects with flawless precision, occasionally turning to Mark to nod or offer a small smile. When the meeting ended, the executives filed out stiffly, muttering to one another. Eleanor gathered her papers calmly, as if the storm she had caused meant nothing. In the elevator, Mark finally asked, "Was that really necessary?" "Of course," she said. "You were not just there as decoration. You were there to remind them that I still make the rules." He studied her face. "You are not afraid of them, are you?" Eleanor looked ahead, her reflection sharp in the glass doors. "Fear is a choice. I stopped choosing it a long time ago." That evening, back at the mansion, Mark found her in the garden, pruning roses with delicate care. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and gold. "You surprised them today," he said. She did not look up. "Let them be surprised. They have been waiting for me to fail for years. I do not intend to give them the satisfaction." Mark leaned against the railing, watching her work. "You know, for someone who claims this is just a contract, you certainly act like a real wife sometimes." Eleanor glanced at him, amusement flickering in her eyes. "Do not mistake performance for sentiment, Mr. Davis." "Maybe," he said quietly. "But sometimes I think you forget which is which." For a moment, the air between them softened. She paused her work, looking at the last bloom she had just cut. "Tell me, Mark," she said. "Why did you really say yes?" He hesitated. "Because I was desperate. Because I wanted to save my mother." "And now?" He looked at her, the dying light catching the fine lines on her face, the quiet strength in her eyes. "Now, I am not sure who is saving who." She turned away, almost smiling. "Careful, Mr. Davis. That sounds dangerously close to affection." That night, after dinner, Mark wandered through the mansion. The halls were dim, the portraits staring down like silent witnesses. He stopped by the same door he had peeked into days before, the one filled with old photographs. This time, he did not enter. He just stood there, staring at the shadows, wondering about the boy named Matthew. He was about to leave when he noticed something new on the hallway table, an envelope addressed to him in Eleanor's handwriting. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short note. "You are stronger than you think, Mark. But strength means nothing without truth. E.B." Below the note was a small brass key. He turned it over in his hand, confusion twisting through him. What truth? What did she want him to find? He slipped the key into his pocket and returned to his room, unable to shake the chill running down his spine. Outside, the night wind rustled through the garden, scattering rose petals across the marble steps like quiet warnings no one would ever hear. That night, the brass key lay heavy in Mark's pocket, pressing against his leg like a thought that refused to rest. He turned it over in his hand again and again, trying to guess what it might unlock. The mansion had hundreds of doors, but something in him said it was meant for one in particular. He waited until the house was quiet. The last of the lights had gone out, and only the soft ticking of the grandfather clock echoed through the hall. Moving slowly, he walked down the east corridor. The air there was cooler, heavier. Moonlight slipped through the tall windows, painting silver lines across the floor. At the end of the corridor stood a door he had never seen open before, made of dark oak with an old brass lock. His heart beat faster as he fit the key inside. It turned with a soft click. The room beyond smelled of dust and cedar. It was small, lined with old file cabinets and boxes stacked neatly on shelves. A single desk stood in the center, covered with faded papers and photographs. He stepped closer, brushing off the layer of dust. There were newspaper clippings about a missing child, dated 25 years ago. The headline read, "Brooks family heir presumed dead after boating accident." Beneath it was a photograph of a young woman clutching a child with familiar dark eyes. Mark's breath caught. The child in the picture could have been him. He searched through the stack of documents, his hands shaking. Birth certificates, adoption papers, hospital reports, and finally, one envelope with his name handwritten in ink that had faded to brown. "For Mark, when he is ready." He opened it. Inside was a letter written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. If you are reading this, then you have already started to question everything. 25 years ago, my son Matthew was taken from me. The police said he drowned. I knew they were wrong. I never stopped searching. Then one day, I found a young law student with the same eyes, the same scar, the same birthday. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid you would leave once you knew. Forgive me, my son. I only wanted time to see you safe, even if it was under a false name. Mark dropped the letter. The room spun around him. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Son. The word echoed like thunder. He stumbled out into the hallway, gripping the wall for balance. Everything felt unreal. The wedding, the mansion, the contract. It had all been a lie. A desperate way for her to keep him close. The next morning, he confronted her. Eleanor was in the conservatory, watering orchids, the sunlight turning her hair almost white. When she looked up and saw him, she froze. You found the room, she said quietly. Mark held up the letter. You could have told me. I tried, she said, setting down the watering can. But every time I looked at you, I saw the boy I lost. I thought if I gave you the truth too soon, you would disappear again. You made me marry you, he said, voice trembling. You made me believe this was a business deal. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. It began as one, yes, but I only wanted to make sure you would stay long enough to hear me. You were not ready then. He shook his head, pain and confusion twisting inside him. Do you have any idea what this means? What people will think. I do not care what they think, she said. I only care that you know who you are. Her hand reached for him, but he stepped back. I cannot do this, he said. I cannot live in a lie any longer. She nodded slowly, her eyes shining with tears. Then do not. Take whatever you need. Leave if you must. But before you go, read the rest of the letter. There is something you have not seen. He returned to his room and unfolded the last page of the letter. At the bottom, written in smaller handwriting, was one final paragraph. My will has been updated. Everything I own will go to the Brooks Foundation to fund scholarships for children without families. But the estate, the home you grew up in, will be yours, if you choose to stay. Not because of obligation, but because this house is where our story began, and where I hope yours can continue. Mark stared at the words until they blurred. He did not know whether to feel anger, grief, or something in between. That evening, the house was quiet again. He walked into the garden where the roses swayed gently in the breeze. Eleanor sat on a bench, her blanket draped around her shoulders. She looked smaller, frailer than before. I was a coward, she said before he could speak. I wanted to keep you here because I was afraid to lose you again. That was wrong. Mark sat beside her, the silence heavy but calm. I do not know what to do, he admitted. You do not need to know, she said softly. You only need to live. They sat there as the sun dipped below the trees. For the first time, Mark noticed how peaceful she looked, no longer the powerful woman commanding a boardroom, but a mother who had finally found her lost son. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You called this a contract, but I think it was something else all along. Eleanor smiled faintly. It was a promise, one I kept in the only way I knew. As twilight deepened, Mark felt the weight in his chest begin to lift. He had come into her life to escape debt, but he had found something far more complicated: truth, forgiveness, and a second chance neither of them expected. The wind rustled through the garden, carrying the faint scent of roses and the quiet peace of two lives finally beginning to heal. The next morning arrived with a quiet calm that felt almost unnatural. The storms that had haunted the Brooks estate for days were gone, leaving behind a soft golden light spilling through the tall windows. The mansion, once heavy with secrets, seemed to breathe again. Mark woke before sunrise, unable to shake the restless thoughts that had followed him through the night. He walked downstairs to find Eleanor in the library, sitting by the window with a cup of tea. Her face was pale but peaceful, and for the first time, there was no trace of her usual composure, only a kind of weary relief. Good morning, he said gently. She looked up, offering a small smile. You did not sleep either. Mark shook his head. Too much on my mind. Truth has a way of doing that, she said. It keeps you awake until you face it completely. He sat across from her, hands folded. I read the letter again. Every word. Eleanor nodded slowly. And what did you feel? Anger, he admitted. But also, understanding. You lost your son. You tried to find him the only way you knew how. I cannot hate you for that. Her eyes softened, glistening. You have your father's kindness, she whispered. He would be proud of the man you have become. Mark hesitated. You never told me about him. She looked out the window, her voice barely above a whisper. He was the best part of me, strong, honest, and stubborn. He died searching for Matthew. When they told me he had drowned too, something in me stopped living. Until you walked into that cafe, I had not felt alive in 25 years. Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint ticking of the old clock. Mark wanted to speak but found no words that felt big enough for the moment. Later that afternoon, the house was filled with visitors again. But this time it was not a party or a meeting. It was the Foundation's annual charity luncheon, an event Eleanor never missed. Staff and guests moved gracefully through the garden, unaware of the quiet storm inside the hostess herself. Eleanor insisted on attending despite her doctor's warnings. This event keeps the Foundation alive, she said. It is not about me. It is about the children who will come after. Mark stayed close to her, watching the way she greeted people with warmth and dignity. When it was her turn to speak, she stood at the podium beneath the canopy of white roses. The crowd hushed. Thank you for being here, she began. This foundation was created in memory of my son, Matthew Brooks. For years, I thought my purpose was to honor him by helping others, but life has a strange way of returning what you have lost. This year, I learned that healing does not come from money or success. It comes from truth and forgiveness. Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not stop. To every person who has ever carried guilt or grief, I want you to know, it is never too late to make peace with your past. The audience applauded gently. Eleanor turned her gaze toward Mark, and their eyes met. He felt something tighten in his chest, a connection beyond words, a bond neither time nor deception could erase. That evening, the event ended with quiet laughter and the clinking of glasses. Guests began to leave, and the garden lights flickered one by one. Mark walked Eleanor back inside. She moved slower than usual, leaning slightly on his arm. You did well today, he said. She smiled faintly. It felt right to say goodbye properly. Goodbye? He asked, frowning. Eleanor paused at the base of the staircase. I have lived long enough to know when my time is near. There is peace in that knowledge. Do not say that, Mark whispered. You are stronger than you think. She placed a hand on his cheek, her touch soft but firm. Strength is not the same as immortality, my dear. You have your life ahead of you. Promise me, you will not waste it hiding behind fear or regret. I promise, he said, his throat tight. She smiled, her eyes glistening in the soft light. Good. Then I can rest. That night the house was silent again. Mark stayed awake, pacing, listening for any sound from down the hall. Sometime after midnight, he fell asleep in the armchair near his window. When dawn broke, Clara, the maid, knocked gently on his door. Her face was pale, her voice trembling. Mr. Davis. It is Mrs. Brooks. You should come. Mark's heart stopped. He rushed down the hall to Eleanor's room. She was lying peacefully on the bed, the morning light falling softly across her face. There was no pain, no fear, only stillness. In her hands rested the same gold wedding band she had once slipped onto his finger. On the nightstand beside her was another note addressed to him. My dear Mark, you gave me back my life in the only way anyone could by letting me see the man my son became. Do not mourn me for long. Build something beautiful with the time you have been given. With all my love, Mother. Mark stood there for a long time, tears blurring his vision. He reached down and held her hand one last time. It was cold, but her presence filled the room like the quiet hum of the rain that had always followed them. Outside, the first rays of sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the garden where her roses bloomed again. He whispered softly, "Goodbye, Eleanor." And for the first time in years, he no longer felt like a man drowning in debt or guilt. He felt like a son who had finally found his way home. 3 days later, the Brooks estate stood wrapped in stillness. The iron gates were draped in black ribbon, the air heavy with the scent of lilies. People came and went quietly, offering condolences that barely touched the grief in the house. Mark had not spoken much since that morning. His world, once divided by secrets and confusion, had become painfully simple. Eleanor was gone. The funeral was held under the oak tree at the edge of the garden, the same place she used to sit every afternoon. The foundation's staff, her lawyers, and a handful of close friends stood in solemn silence as the minister spoke. The wind carried his words across the field, soft and reverent. Eleanor Brooks lived a life of generosity and grace. She believed that every act of kindness could change the course of another life. Her legacy is not just the wealth she built, but the hope she left behind. Mark stood apart from the crowd, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the simple white coffin adorned with roses from her own garden. He remembered her voice, calm and resolute, telling him to live without fear. When the service ended, people slowly drifted away. Only Mark remained. He knelt by her grave, placing the gold wedding ring gently on the tombstone. "Thank you," he whispered, "for the truth, for the second chance, and for loving me when I did not even know who I was." The wind rustled through the oak branches, scattering a few petals across the fresh soil, and for a fleeting moment, he felt she was still there watching, listening, proud. Days turned into weeks. The mansion grew quieter, emptier. But one morning, Clara handed him a small wooden box that had been kept in Eleanor's private study. Inside was another letter and a sealed envelope. The letter read, "My dear Mark, the enclosed documents transfer the estate to the Brooks Foundation. However, I have left you the east wing of the property, along with the gardens. Build something of your own here. Let it be a place where kindness can live on." Mark opened the envelope and found a deed signed in his name. Tears filled his eyes. She had planned everything, down to her last breath. Over the next few months, Mark transformed the east wing into something new. The grand halls became classrooms. The garden became a space for children to learn and play. The mansion that once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and possibility. He named it the Eleanor House, a community school for orphans and underprivileged students just as she would have wanted. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Mark stood on the balcony overlooking the garden. The air smelled of roses again. The laughter of children floated up from below, bright and unguarded. He held the last letter she had written to him, the words nearly memorized by now. "Do not let pain turn you bitter, my son. Let it turn you gentle. That is how love survives." He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in his pocket. For the first time in years, he felt whole not because of the wealth she left behind, but because of the peace she had given him. Looking out at the golden sky, Mark whispered, "You kept your promise, Mother, and I will keep mine." The camera of life seemed to pull back then, showing the mansion reborn, the roses swaying in the evening light, and the faint outline of a man who had finally learned what true inheritance meant, not money, but mercy. A year passed. The seasons changed, and with them, the rhythm of the Brooks estate transformed completely. The once quiet halls now carried the sound of footsteps, laughter, and piano lessons from children who had found a home inside the Eleanor house. The mansion that was once a symbol of isolation had become a sanctuary of hope. Mark Davis Brooks stood by the window of the East Wing office, overlooking the garden where new roses bloomed beside Eleanor's grave. He often found himself talking to her there in silence, telling her about the children, the scholarships, and the life she had unknowingly restored to him. That morning, Clara entered his office with a warm smile and a stack of letters. "More thank you notes from the students," she said. "Seems your mother's dream keeps growing." Mark smiled faintly. It was never just her dream. It was a promise we both made. He opened one of the envelopes. Inside was a drawing made by a young boy, stick figures holding hands under a big house with the words, "Home is love," scrawled at the top. His chest tightened. That was exactly what Eleanor used to say. Later that day, He walked through the garden where the children were planting saplings. "Make sure to give them space," he told a girl who was pressing soil too tightly around the roots. She looked up at him, eyes bright. Like Mrs. Brooks used to say, "You cannot force something to grow. You can only give it room." Mark smiled. She was right about that. As the children ran off to play, he stopped by the rose bed where her favorite white roses bloomed. He knelt, brushing the petals gently. The plaque beside it read, "Eleanor Brooks." She turned a contract into love. He whispered softly, "You did, Eleanor. You truly did." That evening, the foundation held a gala to celebrate its first anniversary. Unlike the grand parties of the past, this one was simple, filled with laughter, shared stories, and music performed by the children. Mark stood at the front of the hall, dressed in a black suit that once belonged to Eleanor's late husband. The crowd quieted as he took the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "1 year ago, this house was filled with silence. Now, it is filled with life. My mother believed that kindness could outlive us, that love was not measured in years but in what we build for others. Tonight, I can finally say she was right." He paused, letting the words settle. "The Eleanor house will continue to grow, to teach, and to give, because that is what she started. And because she taught me that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to something beautiful." Applause filled the hall. For a moment, Mark thought he saw her reflection in the glass Eleanor, standing tall and proud, smiling from somewhere beyond the lights. After the guests left, Mark stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon hung low, casting silver across the garden. Fireflies flickered among the rose bushes, tiny sparks in the dark. He stood by her grave once more. "You can rest now," he said quietly. "The world knows who you really were." The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the scent of roses and the echo of a woman's laughter, warm, steady, eternal. As he turned back toward the glowing windows of the Eleanor house, the camera of life seemed to linger on him one last time. The poor student who once married a millionaire had become the guardian of her legacy, a son, a teacher, and proof that love, once given honestly, never truly ends. 2 years later, spring returned to the Brooks estate. The roses were in full bloom again, stretching along the garden walls just as Eleanor had once envisioned. The mansion had grown quieter, not from emptiness but from peace. The Eleanor house had expanded into 3 new branches across the state, each serving children who had no family to return to, and every one of those homes carried the same words etched above its entrance: "Kindness is the only inheritance worth keeping." Mark Davis Brooks walked through the garden path with a group of new students trailing behind him. Their laughter filled the morning air. He stopped at the base of the oak tree, the one that shaded Eleanor's grave, and placed a small white rose there before turning back to the children. "Do you know why we plant roses here every year?" he asked. A little girl raised her hand. "Because Mrs. Brooks liked them?" Mark smiled. "Yes, she did. But more than that, roses remind us that beauty and pain grow from the same stem. You take care of both, and one day, you bloom." The children nodded, though most of them were too young to understand completely. Still, the message hung in the air, gentle and true. Later that evening, Mark sat in the study, the same room where Eleanor used to work late into the night. The walls were lined with her books, her handwriting still visible in the margins. On the desk sat a framed photograph of the 2 of them taken at that first charity gala, both smiling, both unaware of how close the end had been. He opened the last page of her journal, something he had not been able to read until now. Her words were steady, elegant, and final. "If love is the legacy I leave behind, then I have lived enough. Let the world remember not my wealth, but the hearts I was lucky enough to touch." He closed the book slowly, his fingers tracing the leather cover. The lamp beside him flickered, throwing soft golden light across the pages. Outside, the evening sky burned with shades of orange and violet. Clara entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You still drink it the same way she did," she said with a smile. Mark nodded. "Some habits are worth keeping." They shared a moment of silence before she asked, Do you ever feel lonely here? He looked out toward the garden where children chased each other between the roses. Not anymore, he said. Every voice in this house reminds me she is still here. In them. In me. Clara smiled and left him to his thoughts. Mark walked out to the balcony, the night breeze cool against his face. The lights from the Eleanor house glowed softly below, casting a warm halo over the gardens. Somewhere, a piano began to play the same melody that once made Eleanor tremble, now reborn as a lullaby for children who had found safety under her name. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "You were right, Mother. Love does not end. It only changes form." For a long time he stood there, listening to the music fade into the night. The mansion behind him shimmered with life, the garden alive with color, and the air filled with the quiet echo of a promise kept. The poor student who once married a millionaire had become more than her heir. He had become her legacy, proof that even the most unlikely story could begin as a contract and end as something eternal. And as the screen of life faded to black, one final line lingered like a soft whisper. True wealth is not measured in what you have, but in what you give and who you become when you finally choose love over fear.